I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We have continuing coverage right now of this historic day in Washington in American history with our entire political team here at ABC News. And the big question, what's next? I want to bring in our White House reporter, Rachel Scott, John Santucci, our senior investigative producer, Jack Date, senior justice producer. Guys, we certainly saw an extraordinary day, 7 hours of testimony, 2 different hearings, a lot of ground covered. And for our viewers who didn't catch every minute of it, we hope to break down some of the high points and highlights. But John Santucci, you've covered this from the beginning. You covered the Trump campaign, which was embroiled in all this. Give us your bottom line.
I mean, we saw Robert Mueller testify. I mean, that's the first thing that we all just took away for how few and far between we saw Robert Mueller speak throughout the 22 months of his investigation, but then to see him, Devin, before 2 congressional committees, not one today, answer every question to a degree, obviously staying within the parameters of his 480-plus page report, was just striking to actually see that. But I do think, for anybody that felt that this was going to move some big needle, as our team was just saying on the television network, that didn't happen today. There was nothing that you can take to the bank and say this was a wow moment. This convinced Democrats, Republicans, or those on the independent spectrum that we need to go in and impeach President Trump.
Yeah, you're right. Bob Mueller had only spoken 9 minutes before today's hearing. He defended his report and its credibility. He also warned that Russians are at it right now, trying to interfere again in our next election, and sort of turn the page on this chapter in our politics, ending the investigation, riding off into the sunset, but that political war wages, and a debate over whether or not all of this was a witch hunt and a hoax. Here's how Robert Mueller answered that question.
I can't speak. And when Donald Trump called your investigation a witch hunt, that was also false, was it not?
I'd like to think so, yes.
Well, your investigation is not a witch hunt, is it?
It is not a witch hunt.
When the president said the Russian interference was a hoax, that was false, wasn't it?
True.
And Pierre Thomas is our Chief Justice correspondent, joins us now from Capitol Hill. Pierre, your big takeaway from today and how Robert Mueller performed in the spotlight.
Well, it's clear that he wanted to stay within the lanes of the report. That was his plan going in. He was not going to go outside of it. It made for clearly some awkward moments. There was a point in time where he was shaking off the rust like an athlete who hasn't been on the field for a while. I thought by the second hearing that he was much more on point for how he wanted to respond to certain questions. And that might have been because of the fact that he simply thought that the whole Russian interference in the last election and the potential for more to come was something that he wanted to send a clarion warning on. And I think he sought to do that. But in terms of the style, he's a throwback. He's not a person who wanted to be there. He was a reluctant witness. And I can say this, having covered him, he's a man who is totally unconcerned about public perception.
He sure is, Pierre Thomas. Thank you so much. Obviously, a big part of today was that forward-leaning look. Rachel Scott, you covered the Trump campaign now. One of the things that Bob Mueller said concerns him, it was sort of a sobering moment in the room, was when it was raised that the president recently told our George Stephanopoulos that he would have no problem accepting foreign help in this coming campaign.
Yeah, and the Trump campaign, they're taking a victory lap right now. They are calling this a disaster for the Democrats, and that's the same message that we're hearing from the RNC as well. They were out with attacks all day. I talked to one Trump campaign official that told me this was a failed and desperate attempt by the Democrats to conjure something that just simply isn't there, and they're sticking to their same talking points here. They're saying no collusion, no obstruction. They're saying complete and total exoneration, even though the details of this report have not changed. You heard Mueller up there say, listen, we did not exonerate the president. We did not even talk about collusion because it's not a legal term. And we actually outlined possible instances of possible obstruction of justice. But still, they're sticking to those talking points, Devin.
Jack, did we learn anything new today from Bob Mueller?
Not really. I mean, he said, my report is my testimony at the outset in that 9-minute press conference, and it really was. He kept referring back to his report over and over and over. I think, John, you kept count, right?
Yeah, I think we went to like 39, 40 times, something like that. We lost count at a certain point, but thanks, Jack.
Well, and they didn't drill deeply into the report. I mean, a lot of the lines of questioning are things that are on page 1 of Volume 2, page 2 of Volume 2. For it doesn't take long to sort of see that they really didn't, the questioning didn't really drill deep into the report.
And so much of today's debate centered around Robert Mueller's decision not to make a decision on whether or not the president had obstructed justice in this probe. There were some heated exchanges over that, about why Bob Mueller didn't decide what it meant, what rationale he used. Would he have decided that Donald Trump should be charged if he weren't the president? Here's a little bit of that exchange.
You made no decision. You told us this morning and in your report that you made no determination. So respectfully, Director, you didn't follow the special counsel regulations. It clearly says, write a confidential report about decisions reached. Nowhere in here does it say, write a report about decisions that weren't reached. You wrote 180 pages. 180 pages about decisions that weren't reached, about potential crimes that weren't charged or decided. And respectfully, by doing that, you managed to violate every principle and the most sacred of traditions about prosecutors not offering extra prosecutorial analysis about potential crimes that aren't charged.
Well, listen, regarding collusion or conspiracy, you didn't find evidence of any agreement, I'm quoting you, among the Trump campaign officials and any Russia-linked individuals to interfere with our U.S. election, correct?
Correct.
You also note in the report that an element of any of those obstructions you referenced requires a corrupt state of mind, correct?
Corrupt intent, correct.
Right. And if somebody knows they did not conspire with anybody from Russia to affect the election, and they see the big Justice Department with people that hate that person coming after them, and then a special counsel appointed who hires dozen or more people that hate that person, and he knows he's innocent. He's not corruptly acting in order to see that justice is done. What he's doing is not obstructing justice. He is pursuing justice, and the fact that you ran it out 2 years means you perpetuated injustice.
I take your question.
And John, one of the things that struck me about today's hearing is how much Republicans have rallied around this president. Longtime allies like Louis Gohmert, all the way down the line. Yeah. Each and every one of them have his back. It's a really interesting dynamic going into the campaign.
There was not one Republican that did not step up to the plate and take a swing on behalf of their president. It was really actually quite amazing.
They knew who was watching.
Yeah, and you know, listen, for everything that you could say about where members have been, if they've been with the president, haven't come out strong enough for him, you saw so many of them step up there and do what needed to be done for him. I think one of the examples, and Jack, you'll know this, the congressman from Texas, Radcliffe, who's been auditioning for a job with this president, went in and met with him last week about potential openings at DNI and DHS. He came out of the gate as an audition today. I mean, it really was quite stunning to see where, you know, if you think about 4 years ago, we were talking about where this campaign has gone, where the investigation has gone. To see these members right now, every Republican fell in line behind Donald Trump today.
John Santucci, thanks so much. I know you have to go do some more reporting as we get ready for our shows this evening, but I do want to bring in our legal analyst, Kate Shaw. She's joining us from New York. Kate, a lot of people wondering after all of this, all these questions, where do we stand with impeachment? Nancy Pelosi expected to come out shortly. What's your hot take analysis? Yeah. Do you think anything that you heard today changes the calculus?
Well, I'll be really curious to see how Speaker Pelosi decides to kind of characterize what happened earlier today. I don't think anything this morning really moved the needle, and that's, I think, where people thought there was most likely to be potentially some motion, because in the Radcliffe clip that you just played, right, that's, you know, this decision not to make a decision on obstruction of justice was read by a lot of people as essentially passing the buck to Congress to make its own determination of whether the conduct that's described in real detail in these 10 episodes in the report maybe did constitute a high crime and misdemeanor. And you know, you didn't even get a lot of questions from the Democrats about whether, in fact, Mueller intended to sort of give them the next move in terms of what to do about this conduct. You had a couple of Republicans actually raise impeachment, but mostly to criticize or essentially to say, look, you didn't recommend impeachment, ergo, you know, this isn't even impeachable conduct that's detailed in the report. But it wasn't really explicit at all in the first half. And so to the extent there was going to be some aha moment of Mueller basically saying, ball's in your court, and then the Democrats deciding what to do with it, we obviously didn't see that. I mean, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, they're likely disappointed, anyone who had been hoping for that. And to your point, Kate, I mean, public opinion on this has been plunging. Let's put it up if we have it. In the most recent ABC News Washington Post poll, support for impeachment only at 37%. That's down from 49% last summer, so continues to slide. And I guess the big question before we move on with you, Kate, is what other investigations are underway now that could hold the president accountable in other ways?
Well, so, we know that there's still counterintelligence investigations ongoing. There are at least, I think, a couple of one Senate and one additional House committee investigations. So there are still outside investigations. There is still ongoing prosecution of sort of cases that have been spun out from the Mueller report. But I don't know, there were, in Schiff's conclusion in the afternoon session before the Intel committee, he seemed to be sort of suggesting it's kind of up to us now, although what that is going to consist of, I think, is still an open question. I thought at a few points this morning, Don McGahn came up a bunch of times, and I thought maybe if the sort of momentum is there, the next step is they'll decide we've got to dig further. We maybe will open an impeachment inquiry, and the first thing we need to do is to talk to Don McGahn, because you have this really stark contrast between what Mueller said about McGahn being a credible witness, McGahn having some of the most damning testimony about the president's conduct, and the president calling McGahn a liar. So you have this real kind of credibility contest. I think McGahn would not come willingly. I think that's pretty clear. So they would have to subpoena him, and then there would likely be a court fight. So, so I think this is a chessboard that I'm just not sure sort of the Democrats have any idea what kind of the next moves are. So I think that we'll know a lot more this afternoon when we hear from Speaker Pelosi. And the one more thing I'll say about public opinion is, I think that sort of public opinion and congressional action do feed off each other a little bit. So I think it's, of course, right, we're at 37%, and it has been previously significantly higher. But if the Democrats decided that not just, 90 or 100, but a majority of them were going to take seriously an inquiry into impeachment, I wonder if you might see public opinion kind of move. So, public opinion feeds off of, I think, what people in Congress are saying, and obviously those in Congress respond to public opinion. So if either moves, you may see the other move in response.
It's a bit of a symbiotic relationship for sure. Kate Shaw, legal analyst, thank you so much. Let's bring Tara Palmieri. She's been out on the campaign trail, our White House correspondent, on this issue of public opinion, because Tara, I think so many of us, people who are sort of politics junkies following this closely, here certainly inside the Beltway, people into history tracking this very closely. But do you get the sense that what we saw today is actually going to move the needle out there in the middle of the country?
Well, Devin, you're not hearing the 2020 candidates talk about impeachment. It's not popular. There's a feeling among the 2020 candidates that let's beat President Trump at the polls. It's mainly Congress that are the ones that are talking about impeachment. At the same time, this is about moving the undecideds, right? President Trump, his base is very loyal to him. He joked in 2016 that he could shoot someone on the side of the road and he wouldn't lose his voters. This is about moving the undecideds. The question is, did this hearing really move undecideds? Republicans are fearful of Trump's base, and they're clearly loyal to him. And you would need to switch some of those Republicans over, and some Democrats who aren't that keen on impeachment right now as well. The point is that impeachment is political, and if this was a political exercise, it probably wasn't one of the strongest ones, mainly because Mueller was not the most compelling of witnesses. He seemed tired. He was not impassioned. While he seemed stable and reliable and like a good man, like someone who didn't seem like a partisan, unlike how President Trump is characterized him, he didn't particularly seem impassioned about the fact that the president had committed a crime that deserved to be impeached. He wouldn't even use those words.
Tara Palmieri for us. Thanks, Tara. Stand by. I want to go now to Capitol Hill. Catherine Faulders has been tracking the hearing all day. She was in and out of that hearing room. Catherine, we've been speculating about how Democrats are feeling about the performance today of Bob Mueller. You hear from the Republican Party say this was a disaster for Democrats. What's your sense up there? What are people saying?
Yeah, well, look, as part of the Democratic strategy, they were hoping that Mueller would read the report. They were saying that they wanted to bring this, quote, book to life in a movie. And you saw he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't read from the report after many Democrats asked him to. So in terms of public opinion, what we're talking about here with impeachment, they wanted to hear those words in the report from Mueller themselves. They didn't hear those. And I think Kate made a good point that it's not really clear unclear here what's next. We'll hear from Speaker Pelosi and Chairman Nadler and Schiff later on this afternoon about their next move. You know, they've authorized numerous subpoenas. They still have some lawsuits outstanding. But the question still remains what they do on impeachment. Do they move forward with impeachment? A lot of Democrats were not weighing in on impeachment yet until after the Mueller hearing. But as you said, Republicans are saying this absolutely works against their case to begin impeachment proceedings at all, Devin.
And any early indication, Catherine, of what Speaker Pelosi plans to announce coming up within the hour here?
Yeah, we don't have any particularly early indications. We knew that the Chairman Schiff and Nadler were going to be speaking later on, but I think it's going to be the path forward here. You know, they go for recess, for August recess for a month. They won't be able to talk about this for much longer. So really, what's next? If that's not what she's going to announce, that is surely the questions that we're going to be asking her. Did they find it successful? Was he a credible witness? And now that he's testified, this has been months in the making, what are they going to do next as it relates to this investigation?
All right, Catherine Faulders, our Capitol Hill reporter, investigative reporter. Thank you so much, Catherine. So much today has been made of Bob Mueller's performance, someone who had been out of the spotlight for the better part of 2 years. Jack Date, you know Bob Mueller pretty well, covering the Justice Department and the FBI for many years. What was your hot take on how he did up there?
Well, you know, he's always been kind of a straight by the books Marine. He doesn't fuss around. He doesn't cut corners ever, and he's extremely disciplined. And so he absolutely stuck within the four corners of his report and wouldn't be thrown off base.
He sure wouldn't. Referred often to the report. Some of the special counsel's critics on Twitter, including some from the president's campaign, have accused him of being, quote, mentally retarded. One ally of Robert Mueller on the cables this afternoon said he sucked the life out of his own report. He was very ineffective in delivering a defense of his report. He is taking heat from all sides in this on his performance. So for a different perspective on this, want to bring in the former deputy of Bob Mueller at the FBI for 6 years. He was on the show yesterday. John Pistol joins us, president of Anderson University in Indiana. Mr. Pistol, thank you so much for coming back. So let's just start with getting your take on his performance today. What did it seem like to you watching your old friend up there?
Well, I had really three takeaways from it in terms of how he did and then what he was trying to accomplish. First, I think, and foremost, he kept to his script of trying to let the report speak for itself as best he could, recognizing that people are going to see it through the lens which they had read it through, if they had read it, of course, and that's still a question for many people. So again, he stuck to the script, and people saw it or heard his testimony today through the lens that they had framed their earlier ideas about it. And then third, I think he clearly teed it up for any future action for the Congress to say, look, I've done my job, I've done my report, and now it's up to you to take any further action because I'm done. And based on especially the afternoon testimony, where I thought he was more comfortable in terms of talking about not only the historic, but the ongoing Russia involvement in trying to influence the campaign, that seemed to be where he was more in his element than in the morning session talking about the potential obstruction of justice.
Were you surprised, John, that he seemed flustered at times, hard of hearing? I think more than a dozen times he asked the members to repeat the question. Several Republicans throughout the hearing were waving, "Over here, sir, over here, sir." It seemed in part to perhaps mock him. Obviously, you've helped him prepare for these sorts of hearings before. What did you make of that?
Well, I think that's a disservice to him and his decades of service to the United States. Obviously, if anybody was intending to mock him, that would be a real disservice. Yeah, I think he was not in prime in the hearing this morning, in particular. I think he was trying to be as neutral and as objective as possible in a very, very difficult environment where the Republicans are obviously trying to basically impeach his testimony to undermine his credibility even. The Democrats were trying to extract all the positives. So it was that juxtaposition, if you will, of those two polar positions I think was a challenge for him. And so I don't think it was his best performance in terms of testimony that I've seen him give dozens of times, where it was a much perhaps narrower focus and more of a unified oversight here, and even with different positions. But the polarization, I think, was a challenge for him. And
yeah, tricky to navigate, no question. Yeah, absolutely, no question.
Mr. Pistol, it appears that Mr. Mueller was really trying to send a message to Congress that they need to act, and the U.S. government needs to act right now because of the threat of foreign interference, not just Russian, but other nations as well. Do you think he was effective in delivering that message?
Well, again, I think it's a lens through which you hear or see that message, and so yes, I think he did an excellent job of conveying that message to anybody who was willing to hear it, and hopefully Congress as a whole would take action on that to make sure that our 2020 election is fair and free from outside influence, particularly state actors that were identified in this report that Russia was so active in and continues to be, as he said, even today. So hopefully that message came through loud and clear. And I think that might even be and I'm going outside of my lane here but to try to stay apolitical, but that may be a political point of agreement that all of us in the U.S. want to make sure that our elections are free from foreign interference, regardless of which candidate they may be trying to support or defeat. And so hopefully that unified message would come through, and it'd almost be a compromise for Congress to say, okay, let's move forward with this now and see what happens from there.
Yeah, some of the most animated moments of today's hearing were, in fact, when Bob Mueller was issuing that warning about the Russians, saying it's something all Americans need to pay attention to. Congress needs to act. We'll see. There's some legislation on the table on that front. We'll see what they can get together. John Pistol, president of Anderson University, former deputy to Bob Mueller for 6 years at the FBI. Appreciate your time, sir. Thanks very much for sticking with us late this afternoon. Well, before we move on, I want to highlight one other moment from today's hearing, this one involving that central allegation that the president, as you know, Rachel, is likely to continue into this campaign, one that Bob Mueller is a conflicted individual, had Democrats on his team. He gave an answer to that today for the first time. Here's a little bit of that moment.
Aaron Zelbley, the guy sitting next to you, represented Justin Cooper, a Clinton aide who destroyed one of Clinton's mobile devices. And you must be aware by now that 6 of your lawyers donated $12,000 directly to Hillary Clinton. I'm not even talking about the $49,000 they donated to other Democrats, just the donations to the opponent who was the target of your investigation.
Can I speak for a second to the hiring practices?
Sure.
We strove to hire those individuals that could do the job. I've been in this business for almost 25 years, and in those 25 years, I have not had occasion once to ask somebody about their political affiliation. It is not done. What I care about is the capability of the individual to do the job and do the job quickly and seriously and with integrity.
Jack, big moment for his legacy, off into the sunset. Probably the last time we'll see Bob Mueller.
Perhaps, and you know, he vigorously defended the integrity of his operation, of his shop. He noted that when he found out about Pete Strzok and Lisa Page's issues, he moved to have them removed from the team right away. And in the Justice Department, for these types of investigations, it's inappropriate and against their guidelines to really ask about political affiliations. That's not something that they do. They're looking for the best people for the job, the best investigators, and he's confident that they did just that.
And Rachel Scott, the president, tweeting about this. Also, we're hearing from some of the presidential candidates who are seeking to unseat him today, too.
Yeah, exactly. And this is all about controlling the message going forward, right? I think prior to this, it was TDLR, as most millennials like to say. Too long, didn't read. Now the question is, did they watch? The president apparently was watching. He tweeted, "Truth is a force of nature." And the Democrats are going to be responding as well. So I want to bring in Adam Kelsey, who is one of our campaign reporters. He's been tracking the Democratic response all day. And Adam, I want to ask you, because the Democrats are not only beating the drum, some of them about impeachment, they're also kind of wearing this as a badge of honor. So how exactly does this resonate with their base?
Yeah, there's certainly some calculus here at play, Rachel. We heard from Tara Palmieri earlier that when she's out on the trail, it's not exactly the #1 topic of conversation for the candidates up on the stump, or when she's talking to voters, it's not their favorite topic of conversation. They'd rather hear about health care or the economy, even climate change. But when it comes down to the binary choice, whether or not Democrats in the House should move forward with impeachment or they should essentially let the president off the hook here, most Democrats in our polling support moving forward with impeachment. We looked at some of these poll numbers earlier on, and I'm going to read some of them back for you right now. All adults, irregardless of political party, against impeachment, 37 to 59%. But when you look at the Democratic Party, those Democratic voters, they are in favor of impeachment by a margin of 61 to 36%. So when we're looking at some of the names today who came out and said, I'm supporting impeachment, they're repeating the calls that we heard a couple weeks and a couple months ago. People like Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, a number of the folks at the NAACP convention in Michigan, what they're doing is they're playing to Democratic primary voters. There is still a lot of time for them to win over the independents and the Republicans that they might need to win a general election, but they can't even start to think about that until they win the Democratic primary first. And when you look at those numbers, again, 61% of Democrat and Democratic-leaning voters, the folks who are going to be electing that nominee in the primary, when they support impeachment, it is the politically wise move to come out in favor of it.
All right, Adam Kelsey tracking it all for us. Obviously popular among Democratic base, not so much among all Americans. Thanks so much, Adam. All right, want to head out now to Avery Harper, who is out in Michigan, where some of the candidates are hitting the trail. The NAACP, some of the candidates are talking there. Avery, this is not only an issue among the Democrats calling for impeachment. This is one of the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organizations. They're also talking about it. Tell us what you heard today.
Yeah, well, the voting delegates, and this happened yesterday, the NAACP is having its 110th convention in Detroit, Michigan. Lots of the presidential candidates were on stage today, but yesterday all the voting delegates decided to make the unanimous decision to call for the House to begin impeachment proceedings. Now, this is largely ceremonial. The NAACP can't force legislators to make a move, but it makes a statement, and this organization is joining the growing chorus of voices and leaders who are calling for the House to begin impeachment proceedings. Now, several of those 2020 candidates spoke from the stage today about Mueller, about Trump, and impeachment. Take a listen to what Senator Kamala Harris had to say.
Having run the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, which was the California Department of Justice, I am very clear that there are outlined incidents of obstruction of justice, and no matter what this current Attorney General and the President of the United States try to say, the American people are smart enough to know what is and what is not truth.
So Kamala Harris wasn't the only one who spoke about impeachment today. Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren also called for impeachment from the stage in Detroit. So this is something we can expect to continue to hear from these candidates.
All right, Avery Harper out there in Michigan. Thanks so much, Avery. And want to change a little bit of gears now. Facebook fined $5 billion by the Federal Trade Commission for violating privacy rights. I want to bring in Anna Freed with Axios. Anna, I want to start with you. Break this all down for us. How is this exactly going to impact Facebook users?
They have to pay a big fine, $5 billion. But, as you know, that won't actually affect users. It's going to the government, not you and I. The other thing is a set of new privacy conditions. So this is mainly how Facebook deals with privacy. We're not going to see a lot of day-to-day changes in how you or I use Facebook. They do have to be clear in the future if they want to do things differently, particularly around facial recognition. But indeed, this has been criticized quite a bit by both privacy groups. Democrats, the two Democrats on the FTC voted against this, saying it doesn't actually go far enough and that Facebook won't really have to change the way that it does business.
Yeah, and we're seeing politicians in both parties saying that this simply just didn't go further enough. One Democrat calling this a sweetheart deal, one Republican saying it utterly failed to penalize Facebook. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always tough when you have, especially the monetary fines. I mean, no matter how big they are, and this is the biggest FTC fine by far, you can look at these companies' annual revenues and say, this isn't a big fine. I think the bigger issue is really the conduct. I think, Facebook had to change the way it does business. Had more individuals been held personally responsible, had there been more outside oversight, I think probably that would have gone a long way towards addressing some of these criticisms. There is some outside monitoring when it comes to privacy, but a lot of it is enforcing what they should have been doing all along versus setting new rules.
Will any of this make the information from users safer, or what message does this send to other social media companies out there?
I think there is the potential. I mean, ideally, again, you'd want companies taking this seriously before they face government oversight. And this is actually the second agreement with the FTC. Facebook already had one. So, yes, they could take it more seriously, but they were under an FTC consent decree before this. And still we had all the issues that came out in the last couple of years. So I don't know how much safer we're going to be. Certainly, I would think the penalties, if they violate it further from here, could be higher. But again, it's not clear to me at all how tomorrow's Facebook looks different as a result of this settlement. I think, if anything, the changes that they've already made are more significant than anything new that they agreed to today.
All right, Ina Fried with Axios breaking it all down for us. We appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, Devin, certainly a busy day today. I don't know, nothing happened.
A quiet day here in Washington, but it is, it is fascinating. In a year of extraordinary, epic moments, from the Comey testimony on Capitol Hill, which shut down this town, to the Kavanaugh hearings with Dr. Blasey Ford testifying before those Supreme Court hearings. This was another milestone day in a year of major milestones on Capitol Hill. I can't remember looking back in history when we had something like this. It's certainly one that will go down in the history books as a big moment. A historic day, most definitely. We really appreciate you guys sticking with us through all of our live coverage. And we hope you join us here on ABC News Live. Coming up at 4:45 Eastern Time, we expect Nancy Pelosi and Democratic leaders to talk about a path forward in the wake of the Mueller hearings. And then President Trump is on his way out of town shortly as well. He's expected to speak on the results of today's hearings, so stay tuned here for that on ABC News Live. We'll be back here tomorrow, 3:30 Eastern Time in the briefing room. We hope to see you then.